There's something about the launch of a new Final Fantasy game that inaugurates a new console generation. I faintly remember the time around the launch of Final Fantasy X, which seemed so exciting, with its beautiful CGI and extremely detailed characters. I felt much the same way when Final Fantasy XIII launched, which paired outstanding production values with an emotional story and one of the best JRPG battle systems out there. Even Final Fantasy XV, which is not my favorite, really impressed in a lot of ways, and Final Fantasy XVI is no exception. The combat is the heart of Final Fantasy XVI. The core of the action is pretty simple. You have a melee attack, a ranged attack, a dodge, and a special action, alongside powerful special moves on timers. And enemies have a stagger system, like in many prior Final Fantasy games. But it just animates so smoothly, and the various attacks look beautiful, especially the show-stopping special moves that Clive has access to. The general flow of the action feels pitch perfect and super tight and responsive, to a degree I wasn't really expecting. It helps that the enemies you fight also have engaging attack patterns and beautiful moves. And there are some absolutely stunning boss battles here, with gigantic scale. I really admire the game's visual presentation. While early showings didn't exactly have the most impressive graphics, the final game looks extremely accomplished. Characters have a CG-like quality to them, largely matching the quality of CGI renders in Final Fantasy games some years ago. For someone who grew up playing those games, it's a realization of a long-standing dream of mine. The environments look superb as well, and combat is extremely impressive. All of the special attacks are accompanied by wild screen-filling effects, and the game just loves to bombard the player with particle effect treats. Final Fantasy XVI is up there with some of the best-looking games we've seen this generation. The game's structure deserves some praise as well. Instead of the typical open-world environment, Final Fantasy XVI is set in a large number of discrete locations, though some are fairly open-ended. Players simply select an area on the map to travel to, which makes the variance in locations more plausible than you'd see in a typical compressed open-world environment. It also increases the density of interesting things to see, and keeps the pacing brisk. I enjoyed the story, which, though full of twists and turns, is more comprehensible than it seems at first, and is told quite effectively through hours and hours of cinematic cutscenes. The music is outstanding too, blending traditional Final Fantasy melodies with bombastic new orchestral instrumentation. My only real complaint about Final Fantasy XVI is that there's too much of it. The main quest stretches on for about 40 hours or so, and if you sample a decent chunk of the side content, that can easily balloon to 50 or 60 hours. That's not a problem per se, but some of the content in the main story isn't produced with the same level of production values that you usually see, with stiff conversations and some less inspired locales to visit. And the side content is often a little too bare bones, really very MMO-like, even though there are a lot of quests to undertake. I think the game would have been a better and more consistent experience if it had been trimmed down somewhat, especially for the main scenario. And while the game does look beautiful, I do wish Final Fantasy XVI was capable of a solid 60 FPS on PS5 hardware, which it falls short of in its performance mode. In the 30 FPS quality mode, I think the combat feels great and is perfectly responsive, but I've become accustomed to a 60 FPS update in action games, and it does feel like this could have been a decent 60 FPS title, perhaps paired with some upsampling. Hopefully the upcoming PC release will provide a comprehensive solution to this issue. Ultimately, I think that Final Fantasy XVI is head and shoulders my favorite game of the year. It hits every mark I want out of a Final Fantasy title, while adding excellent action combat into the mix. It comes highly recommended.